Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So if you've been listening to this show for any length of time, you've probably noticed that scaling a company is a common theme for the questions that I throw at our guests. And the reason for that is that scaling a company is something that I have yet to really do, but it's the next challenge that I will have to face in my career. Building a seven-figure business, well, that's relatively easy. All you need to do is learn how to sell a product or service, and you can grow that business by yourself and your laptop at a coffee shop. But if you want to continue to grow your brand and your company, you'll eventually have to start hiring a team, building a culture, managing expenses, hiring and firing, holding meetings, and all of that awesome stuff. So growing your business from 7 to 8 or even 9 figures requires a completely different set of skills. And now the mistakes that you'll make during that process will not just affect you, but they're going to affect others and their financial livelihood as well. It's a very big responsibility, but it is also a skill worth mastering. So a few months ago, I was over at Tucker Max's office here in town, and he mentioned that he was in the middle of scaling his book publishing business for the very first time, and that he'd hired Cameron Herold to coach him through the process. And scaling businesses is Cameron's thing. He was the COO for 800 Got Junk years ago and helped them grow from $2 million per year in revenue to over $100 million within 6 years. And in total, he's helped grow 3 companies to the $100 million plus mark. So the next day, I called Cameron and I hired him to help me lay the foundation for my hydroponics company. And today, I would like to introduce him to you. So without further ado, please help me welcome Cameron Herold. All right, welcome back, everybody. Today, we are joined by a good friend of mine and actually one of my business coaches. So I know this is going to be an absolutely incredibly valuable session for us here today, Mr. Cameron Herold. So Cameron, welcome to Self-Made Man.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Absolutely, brother. So I first came about your work through your book, Double Double, probably, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago when you first wrote that?
Yeah, that's right. It came out 5 years ago last month.
Yeah. So absolutely amazing book. And then, Tucker Max is a good friend of mine here in Austin, and we recently did some work with him, and he's like, man, you need to go talk to Cameron and have him work with you in your hydroponics biz. And I know you've been helping Tucker with his company, Book in a Box, so that's how we kind of reconnected. And it's been awesome, man. So I'm really grateful that you're here on the show and are willing to spend some time with the audience.
Thank you. No, the world's pretty connected. It's amazing. You just got to keep kind of taking care of everybody because it's amazing how connected we all are. Yeah,
absolutely. And, your specialty or your background really is as a COO, so Chief Operations Officer. Can you describe what that means and what that role is responsible for in a typical company?
Sure. And great leadoff question, too. It's actually, there's an article that was written about 10 years ago by Harvard Business Review that talks about the misunderstood role of the COO. And the reason they say it's very misunderstood is that they defined 7 different types of second in commands. You've got the outward facing or inward facing. You have someone who could be technology focused or engineering and process focused. You might be sales and marketing focused. You could be very operationally focused. Very different types of second in commands versus a lot of the other roles. A CFO is a CFO is a CFO. You've got a chief marketing officer is a chief marketing officer. There's just not as much delineation or differences with the different types. But a COO really is the second in command of a company, is often, as I describe, as the yin and yang with the CEO. So they're everything that the CEO is strong in, the COO might be very strong in as well, but their strengths would be the areas usually that the CEO might be weak in. So they become a very good, tag team partner.
So for example, my strengths are sales, marketing, ideation, and creation, which are not related to typically processes, teams, and things like that. So what would be the natural COO or type of COO for someone like me?
Yeah, you'd probably want someone who's very inward facing, someone who's very operationally focused, systems focused, people focused, culture, someone who can really build teams, put the plans in place. people who could almost reverse engineer your dreams. And if you could find the people who can, then run those projects and gather the teams of people who can play operations to your genius, that's where you would win. And ideally, you would want someone who's not worried about your celebrity or your stardom. And in fact, I often tell COOs that the role of the COO is to make the CEO iconic. And we often have to play that, not second fiddle, but we often have to play backstage to their front stage.
Can you walk us through your story at 800 Got Junk and the role that you played there? And, feel free to tell people about the huge transition and win that you guys accomplished. And what was your role in that?
So I actually joined 1-800-GOT-JUNK around 15 years ago now. It's amazing how fast it's gone by. But I joined as the chief operating officer back in October of 2000 and joined one of my very good friends. And he actually asked me originally to coach him. And when I started coaching him, I gave him a list of the top 10 areas that we really needed to build out to accelerate the growth of 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And in doing that, he looked at the list and said, there's no way I can do any of this stuff. I don't even understand it. And why don't you join me and you can make it all happen? So I was really that kind of yin yang to him right in the early days. We ended up in going from 12 people at the head office when I joined to about 3,100 and from 2 million to 106 million in 6 years. And we were operating in 330 cities, 46 states and 4 countries. So went through quite the growth trajectory.
So you've really put that process into a science on how a company can do that. And that's really what you talk about in Double Double. Would you mind walking people through that process?
Sure. And I actually learned a lot of the process over a number of years from working in a few different high growth companies that I was really playing a second in command type role in, and learned how to reverse engineer a lot of things. A lot of your listeners might have heard of a company called College Pro Painters. And I was one of the key execs in that company years back and opened the West Coast of the United States. And we learned how to reverse engineer everything. So the process that I use really starts with the entrepreneur leaning out into the future and looking at what their company looks and feels like 3 years in the future. I call it a painted picture, or now I call it a vivid vision, which is really a 3 or 4 page description describing the company almost as if you're standing in the future. It sounds a little bit hokey, a little bit airy-fairy, but the process is to describe every aspect of your company as if it's already come through. You describe each business area of the org chart. So marketing, sales, operation, finance, IT. You write down what your customers are saying about you, what the market is saying about you, what your employees are saying about you. And you kind of describe it as if you're standing at December 31st, 3 years from now. And you write down in vivid detail what it looks like, acts like, and feels like. And that becomes the finished state of the business. So that vivid vision, that 4-page document, ends up getting shared with everyone. And after you share it, then the key is to how do we reverse engineer all aspects of that vivid vision. And I look at every business almost like a jigsaw puzzle. And I think of the jigsaw puzzle where if you have a very clear picture of the box, the front cover of the box of the jigsaw puzzle, you know what you have to build. So that's really why the vivid vision is important. The 4 corners of your jigsaw puzzle are really your core values, your core purpose, your BHAG, and that vivid vision. And you really have to make sure that in all companies, those 4 areas are very tight, very deep into the organization, and that people are all living all aspects of all of those parts of the company.
Well, real quick, BHAG stands for?
Yeah, BHAG is the big, hairy, audacious goal, and it's a term that Jim Collins coined in his book Good to Great years ago. The idea being that it's a 30-year stretch goal that from the outside might look completely ludicrous, but from the inside seems entirely possible. An example would be Microsoft years back saying to put a computer on every desk. That was a massive goal, especially in the sense that they never made computers, but they wanted to build software that would really push people to the need to have a computer on every desktop. My vivid vision, or my BHAG, is to have the vivid vision replace vision statements worldwide. I just don't see that vision statements, that one sentence statement, actually doing anything, and a vivid vision can completely change an organization. So that's really the 4 corners of your jigsaw puzzle or of your business. When you have those really deep into your company, then you can start working on the 4 sides of your jigsaw puzzle. The first side is all of the people systems. So if you think about on the front end, That's your recruiting, job postings, scorecards, your interview process, your reference checks, the hiring process, the onboarding process, the training process, the integration into the company, all of the ongoing coaching and support, making sure people are in the right roles, the job promotions, the handcuffs, and then also the offboarding, making sure that you're looking for people that don't fit the company, don't fit the culture, and looking to get them out of the company at the right time. So it's really the whole life cycle of the employee would be your people systems. And after those are really deeply understood and the processes, easy to implement processes are put in place in companies, then you can move into the strategic thinking component. A lot of people talk about strategic planning, but there's no such thing. There's either strategy, which is thinking, and then there's planning, which is more operational. So actually keep them separate. So the strategic thinking is coming up with all of the core goals, figuring out the direction of the company, figuring out what's kind of the 1 year and quarterly plans to make that vivid vision start coming true. And then after the strategic thinking side of the business, then you get into your meeting rhythms. And those are all of the meeting processes. That's really why I wrote the book Meetings Suck, was to give all companies and all employees the tools that they need across the organization to make sure that meetings actually don't suck, that you have really high functioning meetings, that everyone understands how to run them. And the meetings are what start giving the employees and the plan the structure to come true. And then the last aspect of the kind of four sides is your financial systems. And it's making sure that you have really strong financial reviews and financial reporting structures in place across the organization so that everybody is looking at all of those key numbers and dashboards together.
So, let's take a business like mine at the moment, like the one you're helping me build and work on, whereas it is essentially just me and some outsourced resources right now. And so let's say I've got my 3-page vivid vision together. What's the first step? Once you've got that outlined, how do you start to bring that to life?
Yeah, so the first step is after the entrepreneur or the CEO gets their 3 or 4 page draft written, you really actually want to pass it off to a writer and make sure that you have a writer who can really make it pop off the page. Now, in your case, you're actually a great copywriter as well. You actually understand a lot of the science of this. So yours is probably much stronger than 95% of the entrepreneurs out there. But for the average entrepreneur, I would say that we're not great copywriters. So you really want to pass it to somebody who can really make it pop off the page and make it really visceral, add some graphic design elements to it, and then make sure that you're passing that to everyone. You're getting copies of it to your suppliers, to your customers, to your employees, and you're really giving copies of this vivid vision out to everyone so that they can start to figure out how to make it happen. It's almost like the contractor who's building the home. Once the homeowner gives the contractor all of the pictures and sketches and drawings and photos out of magazines, the contractor can look at all of those and start putting together blueprints to make that vision come true. And that's really the next step for you, is to get your vivid vision out to all the stakeholders, whether it be contract employees, full-time employees, or advisors. And you start thinking about what are the parts of the vivid vision that you can make come true in year 3? What parts should you make come true in year 2? And what parts can you make happen in year 1? And then all of the parts that you want to make happen in year 1, you kind of break those down into quarters: 4th quarter, 3rd quarter, 2nd quarter, 1st quarter. And then you can start putting a plan in place with who's going to get what done by when. And that might be outsourced people, contract people, full-time employees, what have you.
So, one of the biggest questions that I have on my mind constantly is, who's that first big hire, right? Is it a COO? Is it, a marketing director? Typically, what would you recommend to a solo entrepreneur who's building a team?
Yeah, if I was a solo entrepreneur, I'd probably look to get a jack of all trades, master of none, with someone who's really good at getting stuff done, someone who's really good at managing outsourced people, contractors, someone who's really good at delegating lots of things and making sure that it gets accomplished, someone very entrepreneurial who can bootstrap and look for ways to get things done faster and cheaper. Because really what you're looking for is someone who you can work with, who can really help get a lot of stuff. That momentum is going to create momentum. So I wouldn't look necessarily for a very strong functional person. I'd rather have a jack of all trades who can really make sure we get a bunch of stuff done. And then over time, you'll start building out your org chart with more strength, more depth in specific areas.
So what would you title that as in a job description, right? Would you put, right hand man or woman needed, jack of all trades needed, or is that typically a name for that role?
Yeah, you might put down an operations manager or a project manager, and I would make sure that the job description says working hand in hand with the entrepreneur and founder. Someone who's going to be like, you're at the front, like make sure they understand you're really at the front edge of this rocket ship that's going to take off. Are you looking forward to build a rocket that's going to go to the moon? If you are, join me. If you're not, don't do it. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. It's going to be one of the fastest growth trajectories you've ever seen. You're going to need to adapt and wing it and make stuff up as you go and bob and weave. And your number one thing on your list of job descriptions needs to be and other duties. And if this sounds like you, if you're saying hell yeah when you're reading this, then sign up. And that's kind of why I really like a marketing person to write the job descriptions, is they can really make the jack of all trades, master of none sound like a pretty damn awesome opportunity.
And so do you recommend taking people who you're thinking about hiring through any kind of personality profile? Are you a fan of Colby or DISC or any of those systems?
I like all of those systems. I like Colby and DISC both. Actually, would be in the kind of top two of the three. Strength Finders might be in the top three as well. I like using all of those after I've made the hire. I don't actually use it as part of the interview and selection process. What I'm looking for is who fits really strong culturally, and then what are their skill sets in getting the stuff done that I need them to get done. And then after I've got them on board, I'm going to then use the personality profiles to find out how can I work really well with them? How can we learn more about each other? But I'm not going to use it as part of the screening process, but I will use it later and do typically one personality profile per year with each of the membership or the leadership team, is to really learn how to work better together.
So let's dive into the actual daily execution or implementation of a business, which in most cases, at least for my audience in the internet world, is most likely going to be a virtual business in the beginning. There's no office. This person, jack of all trades person, is most likely going to be in another city or another state. And we have a mutual friend in the form of Eben Pagan, who's really pioneered the virtual company over the last 10, 12 years now. And if your meeting process is going to, play a big role in pulling that off successfully. So what is important when it comes to managing a team from a virtual standpoint?
Yeah, it's really making sure that you have people that collaborate and work well together, that you're working with people who communicate clearly, and people that really can empathize with each other. Often I find that you can get into a role, whether you're working in an office with people or remotely, and it comes down to often communication or miscommunication. So you want people who, don't get frustrated, are empathetic, are going to be drivers, but they're also, culturally, they care about people and they're going to work to get through things and get over problems. So I think that's a really core behavioral trait that you're going to look for. Secondly, is you're going to look for people who really leverage technology well. People who learn to collaborate using technology like Asana or Basecamp or Slack or, Messenger. People that want to use video to communicate with each other so that we can keep the relationship up. And then you're really looking for people who deliver on their promises and, are going to do what they say they're going to do. I think that's one of the core frustration points that happens in an office. But if you're working remotely, you're always wondering what the hell's that person up to? Well, as long as they're delivering on their promises, you're not really worried about when they're working or how they're working.
So let's talk about your strategy when it comes to holding effective meetings, because that does become, much more important in a virtual setting.
Yeah, it's actually just as important in every setting, virtually for sure. But people for years have said meetings suck. And the reality is meetings don't suck at all. We just suck at running meetings. We're just really bad at doing it. So what I like to do is get every employee trained in running meetings. I'm not sitting here trying to pitch my book. I don't really care if we sell hundreds or thousands of copies of Meetings Suck. That's not the point. But you need to get all employees to understand how to attend meetings, how to participate in meetings, or how to manage and run meetings. Regardless of what role they're in, they need to understand how to show up and how to participate or how to run them. So the basic kind of structure on how to run high functioning meetings is this. Every meeting, first off, has to have a clear purpose. Just the one sentence, why are we showing up? Right? What are we getting done? Every meeting can have a maximum of 3 outcomes. So what are the 3 big things we're going to get done? As soon as you end up having more than 3 outcomes, you should probably set yourself up for an additional meeting, because you're just trying to cover too much at one time. And you probably don't even need to have all the people that you think about having showing up at that. Because at some point, the more content that you're covering means that some people don't need to be there for all that content. Step 3 is no agenda, no attenda, right? Make sure that you have an agenda for the meeting. What are you covering? In what order are you covering it? And how many minutes are you going to spend on each agenda item? And that's really key, because it allows people to see what they're coming for. It allows them to see where they should be focusing their time. It allows them to also opt out of specific meetings. And I think that's a really key opportunity, is to give people the chance to opt out of meetings, to say, you know what, love to be there, but I've got other things that are more important, or that I think are going to be best served by me focusing on than showing up for this meeting. And you guys have got it covered without me. And that's actually really powerful when you start allowing people to opt out of meetings. The next part is every meeting has to start on time. You really have to treat this like a race in the Olympics. Imagine a swim race where all the swimmers the gun's going to go off right at 9:00. Well, the swimmers have to show up and be there and be ready a few minutes in advance. They can't show up right as the gun's going off and say, hey, I'm ready. They need to show up in advance and be ready and be warming up, so that when the gun goes off, they're actually jumping into the pool and trying their actual best. So the meetings have to start on time, which means people usually have to show up about 5 minutes early to be prepared for that. I also like to stop every meeting 5 minutes prior to the scheduled ending time. So if you're scheduling a meeting from 9:00 until 10:00, ideally you want the meeting to end at 9:55. And that allows all the employees to wrap up what they're doing and to move on and get down the hall and be ready to talk, or be ready to work on the next part of their day, and showing up for that one on time. The next thing I try to do is book all the meetings for half the time I first think about booking them for. So if it's a 1-hour meeting, I'll typically book it for 30 minutes. And I'll book it for 30 minutes, and we'll control the idle chatter. We will make sure that we stick to the agenda. We'll have a moderator that keeps track of what we're supposed to be talking about and might write up some good ideas that we don't really have time for right now. They'll put it up on a parking lot so we can talk about it either offline or later. And that's really the core structure of how to run great meetings. I get into a lot of detail in the book Meetings Suck about how to attend them and how to get introverts speaking at them, et cetera. But that's the core concept of how to run great meetings.
Now, what's the basic structure that you like for your typical business when it comes to meetings on a weekly basis, right? Like, how many meetings does a company usually want to start with? What should they cover? How long? How long should they last? And how often should they take place?
Yeah, you're looking at this in the right way. And it's kind of what we call the meeting rhythms, and what are the core meeting rhythms that you want inside of your company. So if you roll the camera ahead and work it backwards, you really need to have the strategy meetings in place first. So your annual planning retreats, or your annual strategy retreats, and then your quarterly strategy and planning meetings as well. So you've got time in your calendar, 1 or 2 days, about 3 months prior to the start of your calendar year. You're going to go off site for a day or two to come up with your core goals for the year, your revenue, profit, customer engagement, employee engagement, strategic initiatives. And you'll think through those together as a team. You'll have some time set aside at that retreat for training and for skill development. You'll have some time set apart for team building. You'll have some time set apart for coming up with all the core projects to make those goals happen, so that you literally leave the meeting or leave that retreat with the goals as to where we're headed, more alignment with the organization, and the core projects in place that everybody agrees on. So now you can go back and really hit the road running. So that's the first core meeting that you need in your calendar, is your annual retreat. Your quarterly retreat is typically a half day or a full day, and that's usually done 2 to 3 weeks prior to the start of every quarter. So that goes into your calendar. So those are 4 meetings that are in your calendar for every year. The next thing that you need is time in your calendar every month for just talking about strategy. Just what if? What if this happens in a bad way, or what if this happens in a good way? And just as a leadership team, spending 2 to 3 hours every month to just brainstorm and blue sky and talk through some of the what ifs that might be coming down the pipe 6 months to a year out, so that you're always thinking about the future but executing on today. So that's a once a month meeting that happens. Then you also have a once a month finance meeting. where you typically get all your employees together and you review the financial statements. You go through the P&L together as a team. You go through all of the expenses line by line and try to find waste, trying to find areas for opportunity, trying to find areas for inefficiencies that you can kind of work on as a team. So that financial pulse is really important. And that can either be an all company meeting, all employees, or it could just be just the management team. But you need to have a 1 hour meeting every month to review the financials together as a team. Outside of that, you just need to have your weekly leadership team meeting where your leadership team meets. And I typically do a 60-minute or a 90-minute meeting. Let's say it's 60 minutes. The first 20 minutes, each member of the leadership team does their quick updates. So they do their what's going well, what's not going well, what am I working on, and where am I stuck? And they follow that format, and each person does their very quick verbal updates. So now everyone knows what everyone's working on, and we get that alignment started. The next 20 minutes of that meeting, we look through the dashboard. So we go over the KPIs together as a team, and we take a look at any of the core numbers that need to be focused on or worked on over the next week or couple of weeks together. So we're always, again, reviewing that dashboard as a team. The next step that happens is you take an area that someone is stuck and you help unstick them. So you've heard in the updates areas that people are stuck or not doing well with. Well, the team then works to help unstick somebody on their team. So that's the regular weekly meeting. And then the only other one that we have past that is your coaching meetings. And that's your one-on-one coaching where the CEO coaches each of their direct reports and each of the VPs coach all the managers. The managers might coach the frontline staff, but it's a one-on-one coaching meeting with you and each of your direct reports. And that's where you work with them on skill development, making sure that they're working on the right stuff so that you're directing them in the right direction and that you're giving them any emotional support related to their role or their personal lives. And I mean, that sounds like a lot, but when you actually write it down into a calendar, it's probably a full day of meetings per week. And then the other 80% of your time, you're working on the business. Now, I also try to remove a lot of the email that happens during the day as well. So we spend a lot more time talking face to face and in meetings versus going back and forth on email where a lot of the miscommunication happens. The only other meeting that I would put in place, which kind of follows the Agile Scrum model, but it's a all company daily huddle. And it's a 7-minute stand-up meeting that happens typically around 11 a.m. And all the employees get together for a very quick stand-up meeting where we share good news. We go through any of the daily numbers for that quarterly theme that we're focusing on. And then we share any updates from one business area per day. So marketing will do their update on Monday, finance on Tuesday, etc. And that way everyone in the company is always on the same page and pulling in the same direction.
What do you do if the news during those meetings, as you're looking at the dashboard, is on a downtrend?
Yes, and it can even be on a downtrend or it could be ahead of goals. So what you want to do is look at the numbers that are outside of the band of acceptability. And if they're outside of the band of acceptability, you quickly point it out and someone takes kind of point with that and they offline will figure out what to do to make that number improve. Or if they already know, they'll tell the group at the daily huddle or at the war meeting, here's this number, here's what we're actually doing about it. And we'll work together as a team to drive that forward.
Yeah, I just assume that gets into a whole leadership, kind of an intangible leadership piece, right? Where if that number's in the red and on the downtrend, and let's say it's getting to a point of significant financial pain for the business, when do you have that tough conversation with whoever is in charge of that KPI? And do you let them go? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so you're first off really talking about it at Daily Huddle. The numbers are kind of getting reviewed by everyone. And then at the leadership team meeting, there's a little bit more visibility, discussion, and debate. So the pure kind of team holding the team accountable probably happens mostly at that leadership team weekly meeting. And then if it comes down to needing to have that tough discussion with somebody, that's part of your weekly, one-on-one meeting or your weekly coaching meeting that you're having. Or you're just quickly pulling somebody aside during the week and saying, hey, I've noticed that this metric is going sideways. We need to talk about it. What are we doing about it? How do we work through it? And if we flip the org chart upside down so that the CEO is at the bottom, holding up the VPs who are holding up the managers who are holding up the, staff and the customers, no one should really be getting in trouble for a number until we've spent a lot of time already trying to help them with that number. People are responsible for things, but our role is to help remove obstacles and get them the coaching or mentoring and, help them to grow as leaders.
So there seems to be a chicken or the egg aspect to business that I've run into a couple of times as you're growing, where increased revenue is needed to pay for, let's say, expansion of the team. And yet sometimes to increase revenue, you need to expand the team. So, how do you recommend new companies handle that?
Yeah, so I talk about something called hiring ahead of the curve. And it's really looking at what your company looks like, that 3 years out, so you know where you're going to be. And then it's doing your org chart for what your company looks like 2 years out and 12 months out. And it's starting to hire the people a little bit before you need them so that they can build what the company is going to move into. But that is when you really need to have the tight plans in place and you execute on those plans. So it's, brief or plan, brief, execute, debrief. And it's constantly going back to the plan. Where a lot of entrepreneurs fail is they don't have a plan in place. They just have this kind of crazy vision for what success looks like, and they start throwing revenue at it without understanding the P&L and how a company actually makes money. That's why a lot of retail operations fail, is they don't really understand the numbers, and they have a great vision for what their business looks like, but they don't understand how many customers they need to get in the door to be buying their widget, and how much money their widget costs, and how much is going to be left over from the sale of widgets to pay for all the overhead. You really need to have a strong financial grasp as to what your sales funnel and P&L looks like, and then you build against that.
So how do you make sure that the team members that you're bringing on, it's essentially an expense and overhead, right, are going to add to the bottom line, even if they're not directly in an income producing or revenue producing role? Because that's just a challenge that I've run into a couple of times where, we've got an office, now we've got a team, but the people who were bringing in revenue were still doing what they're doing, and revenue didn't increase, but the bottom line increased, and that just caused all kinds of problems.
Yeah, I think it's taking a look at, what metrics is each person accountable for, or what KPI is a person accountable for. And it's really making sure that we start to hold them accountable to those numbers, and we make sure that they have the skill to work on and grow that area of the business. So it's essentially at the beginning of hiring someone, it's putting together what we call the scorecard and looking at what are the 5 big things the person needs to get done over their first year. What KPIs or metrics are they responsible for in their role? And then have they done this stuff before? Do they have the skills to actually do this? And we can say yes, because they've done it before. Most people tend to go out and hire somebody that they like and give them a bunch of responsibility. What I try to do is hire somebody I like who also has the skill set to do it because they've done it in the past. And I think that's really critical.
Yeah, that's definitely a big piece of the puzzle. What would you say are the major pitfalls or tripping points that you see growing businesses fall into on a regular basis?
The first one's really focus. A lot of people just get up in the morning and they just start working, and they're busy, and they're working on busy work, and they're working really hard, and they're working really busy. It's like, stop. Like, are you actually getting the critical few things done? Are you working on the highest impact areas? I always talk about just making sure that you understand your financial side of your model to make sure that the revenue that comes in the top has enough to pay for the cost of the product, has enough to pay for the overhead, and is enough to leave you with enough money to continue to reinvest to grow, but also to pull some off the table. And if you don't understand how to set that up yourself, you need to get some financial advice to help you set it up. That way you don't just end up working hard. So the first one is most entrepreneurs miss on having a strong financial model for their product or service and growth. The second one is most people just aren't focused. They wake up in the morning and they're busy, but they're not necessarily working on the most important things. They're just simply working on the busy stuff, and time does get away from you. You think that even with your employees, you only have 3 resources: people, time, and money. The key is to put your 3 resources to work in the best possible way to give you the best possible ROI. So if you have a group of employees, do you have them working on the right things, or are they simply being busy as well?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Such an interesting puzzle to figure out, but I'm grateful to have someone like you to serve as the guide through this crazy jungle. So we've got about 5 minutes left, Cameron. Any other parting words of wisdom that you would like to share with everyone?
Yeah, one big one that I've been thinking a lot more about, I guess, in my time working with so many entrepreneurs, is that we all take ourselves too seriously, and at the end of the day, none of us are getting out of this alive, right? We're only in this for X number of years until we die. And I think we just need to have some fun along the way. We need to enjoy ourselves and laugh at ourselves and have some fun and make sure that our employees are having fun. And if we can really have fun and build a business while we're doing it, that's the key. But to really just be grinding it out, only to know that we're going to pay taxes and die seems like a bit of a sad statement ahead of us. So I really encourage everybody to focus, but have fun as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's so easy to lose track of that. But you look at Richard Branson, and he's my constant source of inspiration and a reminder to that priority, or that seems to be at the center of his philosophy when it comes to life and business. Is the guy is always happy, he's always smiling, and he's always dealing with challenges and businesses that are going under and lawsuits and all kinds of crazy stuff. But at the end of the day, the dude's just having fun.
Yeah, and I think when we do that, then it kind of trickles off in all the right areas, right? When we're having a good time along the way, people want to spend time with us. So that would be the first. The second part of it is really make sure that you're constantly working to grow people. The more that you can grow other leaders in your organization, the more they're going to be able to grow your business for you as well. So it really is about you focusing on growing other leaders versus just getting stuff done. And then the last part I would leave with you is a friend of mine from Vancouver, Canada, who calls himself the lazy entrepreneur. And his whole thing is, how can he delegate more and get more off of his plate every day so that he's doing less and growing faster? And I think that's a really, really big opportunity for people, is to, instead of saying, I need to get this done or I need to do this, no, you need to get it done. Who can you get it to? Or can you automate it first? Or does it even need to get done? Can you kind of put that decision-making tree in place? So when you have a task or a project in front of you, can you either delete it first, automate it second, outsource it third, delegate it fourth, or then maybe do it yourself fifth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Cameron, this has been unbelievably useful, just jam-packed with nuggets of wisdom. Where can people go to connect with you? Where can they go to learn more about, obviously, Double Double and Meeting Suck? Well, Amazon is probably the place for that. But where can people go to connect with you and follow your work?
Sure. They can go to CameronHerold.com, and that's Cameron and then HEROLD.com. All of my books, Double Double and Meeting Suck, are available on Amazon and then iTunes and Audible as well for Double Double. And then also the COO Alliance, which we didn't really talk about, but that's the model that I'm building out to support the seconds in command. And that's just COOalliance.com.
Awesome. And guys, the book Double Double is amazing. Again, I've read it 2 or 3 times since I purchased it a few years ago, and it really is at the center of my visioneering process for the hydro company. And so I can't recommend that enough. And Cameron, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll see all of you guys next week. Take care.
Thanks, Mark. Had fun.